I'll be totally upfront and honest with you guys. I have absolutely no idea where to begin when attempting to explain the game Control. No, really.
Gotcha.
This game is an enigma and an anomaly that befuddles the mind and really makes you question as if anything you're actually experiencing is really happening. Many of these confusing aspects of the game really add to the experience. Additionally, some of these are detrimental to the game's plot and story, and I'll definitely touch on those specifics here in a bit. Anyways guys, here is my review of 2019's Control, developed by Remedy Games and published by 505 Games. So go ahead and take a step into the oldest house with me, and try not to touch any objects of power. Wait. Oh, it's gonna get weird. So to understand the idea behind Control, a good starting point would be to understand or learn more about something called the SCP Foundation. SCP meaning either Special Containment Protocol or Secure Contain Protect, which is something that Control is loosely based on and or takes inspiration from. Now I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole too much on the SCP Foundation, mainly because I'm not quite sure if it's entirely serious, or if it's just a bunch of people on the internet getting together to share short stories that they've created that thought were interesting reads or whatnot. Now we are talking about the internet here, so I'd imagine it's a good mix of both. People who actually believe it and people who are just having fun with it. In essence, the SCP Foundation is a fictional organization in the background of society that finds and contains individuals, entities, or locations that violate natural law and are of a paranormal nature. And honestly, that's all you really need to know that's really pertinent to the game itself. So let's get into Control. So within Control, you play Jessie Faden, as she enters a large governmental building known as the Federal Bureau of Control, located somewhere within New York City. As to why she is seeking out this building and entered it, well, 17 years prior, her and her younger brother, Dylan Faden, were involved in a paranormal event that took place within a dump, involving a slide projector and some slides contained within it. This type of event in the world of Control is known as an AWE, an Altered World Event. This AWE event took place in their hometown of Ordinary, Wisconsin, and led to the disappearance of many of the adult population of the town. It's also not quite clear to me if this event caused them to have some sort of supernatural abilities, or if they already had it prior, but I'd like to assume that the event itself is what gave them their abilities. Additionally, after these events, Jessie realizes she has some sort of supernatural being that she can communicate with. This entity she has named Polaris, and does not quite know whether this entity's intentions are good or purely selfish. But it, at least for the time being, points her in the right direction, which apparently is good enough for her. Alright, so last tidbit of info before we go back to current time. After the AWE event in Wisconsin, FBC, Federal Bureau of Control, operatives at some point are able to catch up to Jessie and her brother. They apprehend Dylan, but Jessie is able to get away. Now we can fast forward 17 years later to current events. Upon entering the oldest house and not being met with any building employees, Jessie is met with Ati the janitor. Ati within the game is a very interesting character himself. Whenever you interact with the character throughout the game, you can hear him listening to Finnish music. Martin Suasolo, the voice actor for the character, is Finnish as well. And Remedy Games, the developer of Control, is a Finland-based studio. Finland! Ahti directs Jessie towards an elevator, assuming she is there for a job interview. Jessie enters the director's office of the oldest house and finds the current director of the building, Zachariah Trench, has shot and killed himself. Polaris calls out to Jessie, instructing her to take the gun that Trench had used. Upon claiming the gun, it is revealed that it is an object of power. An object of power is an item altered that can connect someone to something called the astral plane. This gun is also extra special because it is considered to be the service weapon, and whoever currently owns the weapon is considered to be the director of the FBC. The service weapon brings Jessie into communication with something called the Black Pyramid, or simply the board. Not much is really known about this board other than it is some sort of paranatural entity that resides in the astral plane, and their goals are pretty unknown. They demand that in order for Jessie to become director, she must pass a test within the astral plane, of which is a relatively short section of the game, but is a nice introduction to the astral plane world. Everything Jessie has been through up to this point has not been for no reason though, for within the oldest house stirs something only known as the Hiss. The Hiss is another paranatural entity. All that's really known about it is that it is hostile and aggressive and only seeks to self-propagate. Its origins, from what I've read, may be directly tied to the AWE event involving Jessie, Dylan, and the slide projector from 17 years earlier. So your goals as Jessie and as the new director of the oldest house is to find and save your brother Dylan, and to push back the Hiss and reclaim the oldest house, cleansing our plane of the Red Menace.
This house is clean.
Without a doubt, in my opinion, the strongest aspect of Control is the world within the oldest house itself. The amount of diverse locations within the oldest house is pretty substantial and can be very imaginative. Locations range from the very basic design of the normal everyday architecture to warehouses and scientific facilities, but can change drastically due to the house's paranormal connections. And then this also can change drastically when flat out in the astral plane dimension. In my opinion, I think what really helps differentiate each of these locales from one another is the game's use of shapes, lighting, and colors. The astral plane in its blocky nature is surrounded by black and white, of which to me signifies the astral plane encompassing everything, white considered to be the combination of every color, and black considered the lack of color. Additionally, you have areas like Black Rock Quarry, which are heavily black, but are brightly illuminated by lights all around. I found this area to be visually pleasing and enjoyed the little section that takes place within it. Colors within the game aren't only for simple decoration though. They can also kind of tell you what you're walking into or whom you may be speaking to next. Generally, yellow signifies that you are entering a research area or an area Dr. Darling inhabited. I'll talk about him in a bit. Blue signifies either Polaris or Zachariah Trench. And lastly, of course, red clusters signify the oncoming of the Hiss. All the audio throughout the game is really good as well. All the guns sound crispy, and I don't really think there's any particular sound or aspect of the audio that really takes you out of the game, which is all you can really ask for audio. The soundtrack is really good as well. It really does a great job of using songs that are really quiet and kind of eerie, but also loud and bombastic. Some of my favorite moments in the game musically involve a band called Poets of the Fall. The speaker room is a standout for me. The ashtray maze is also a section within the game that has a song from Poets of the Fall within it. This song and part of the game might be my favorite. As for the characters, I would say almost all of them are super interesting and intriguing. Helen Marshall is the head of operations at the FCB. She's kind of the no-nonsense leader of the ground troops for FCB. Emily Pope is one of the lead researchers at the Bureau and is one of the first employees that Jessie encounters when she enters the building. Her and Jessie have many interesting dialogues back and forth between the two. Zachariah Trench, of course, as I mentioned earlier, was the director of the Bureau before Jessie. There's Dylan Faden, Jessie's brother, who I won't talk about, simply for anyone who's wanting to experience the game and find out what happens with that side story. Ati the janitor, who I've already talked about, but he's one of my favorite characters in the entire game. And lastly, there's my favorite character in the entire game, sorry to Jessie, Dr. Casper Darling, voiced by Matthew Peretta, who happens to be the voice actor also for Alan Wake. He plays the classic quirky researcher who delves in too deep into what he's looking and knows not what the ramifications will be. This head of research is most definitely cartoony, and he's definitely the wackiest character in the whole game. The voice acting in this game is definitely top-notch, and again, for me, almost every character was likable and had some sort of quirk that led to me enjoying their dialogue sections. Something else that Control consistently does well, and helps keep you pushing through its sometimes confusing story, is its gameplay as a whole. As you encounter hiss clusters, your main service weapon is the revolver, but throughout the game you also unlock the scatter gun, which is basically just a shotgun, a spinning handgun which shoots rapidly, the charge gun which fires 3 rounds, and then lastly you also get the Pierce gun, which for me was one of my favorites. There's also a huge array of different enemy types that changes up some of the combat. The ones that stood out the most to me and gave me the most problems in terms of combat were definitely the demolitionists, who launch rockets at you, so make sure you get your shield up. The snipers, who cause you to constantly be on the move. And lastly, those dang warped. The warped have the ability to generate a shield, and also have a launch power that is able to take items and throw them at you. For me, these guys were most definitely the hardest enemies in the game. They were especially annoying because at one point in the game, it decides to pit you against 2 of these guys, and also throws the kitchen sink at you. Alas though, the warped are not the only ones in the game capable of using this launch ability. Perhaps more interesting than the guns in the game is your set of abilities and powers that you gain throughout from completing many astral plane trials. Jessie's launch ability is without a doubt my favorite. Grabbing random objects around you and throwing them at your enemies is really satisfying. At no point in the game during my playthrough did I ever feel like it got old. And it definitely reminded me of the old Force Unleashed games, which I loved, so it's definitely a good throwback. Other notable abilities that I used frequently were Levitate and Seize. You've also got a melee ability that I really didn't use that often, and a shield ability that I don't know, just never really felt compelled to use. For the most part because I felt like I was in control of every fight. Later on in the game you do unlock the ability to launch your shield at your enemies, which does make it marginally better. Another thing that the creators of this game put a lot of time into was their very robust leveling up and upgrade system. Your abilities, health, and energy can be upgraded using ability points that you gain through side missions and main story missions. Applying these points can only be done at control points spread out all over the oldest house. All that is required to gain these control points is to cleanse them. The control points can also fast travel you to any other control point located anywhere on the map. Jessie can also switch to alternate outfits here. You can also access additional missions and random events located all around the oldest house. Lastly, the control points allows you to use source credits and other resources that you find throughout the game, and construct weapons or change the ones that you have using mods, which again points to a really robust upgrade system in the game, whether talking about the weapons or your abilities. I've never viewed it as a negative when a game gives you variety and options. One of the few big gripes I guess I have with the game is I really disliked its map overall. I found it a bit non-descriptive and just didn't do a good job for me kind of showing me where I was or where I was going. One good thing about it is you can kind of have it on screen as you're moving, which kind of helps, but then you can't see where you're going, so yeah. It's gonna be a no for me, dog. One more thing that I also did want to touch on is the huge amount of collectibles and ultimately reasons that you just have to keep going back through each location in the game. Each level has multiple areas locked off and can only be accessed by acquiring higher and higher levels of clearance. Most of the time what you find inside are resources or sometimes collectibles. This mechanic is very Metroidvania and I think gives great incentive to backtrack. All of the collectibles that you gain throughout the game are super interesting, mainly because almost everything you experience in the game is documented in some form. That means all of your hotline calls to the board, your communications with Trench, all of the numerous videos you see of Dr. Darling all around the facility, and lastly all of the case files and correspondences that has documented everything that's happened within the oldest house is all there for you to read. And it really is great to see a place within the game that you can look at all of this lore and kind of dig deeper into the game if you're looking to do that. I most definitely had to for this review. Alright, so wrapping up my thoughts on Control. In totality, I had a blast with this game. I loved every character, I loved the world it built, I loved all the lore behind it. There was just so much about the game that I loved. I guess the only true negatives, if I had to give negatives out for the game, would be the map, as I touched on earlier. Perhaps there's a little bit too much backtracking within certain levels. It was never an egregious amount, but just a tad much. And I guess I will say the only major gripe I had with the game is that a lot of the best boss battles within the game take place in many side missions. So if you're looking to play this game, you absolutely have to do the side missions. And make sure your fridge is full. And with that, because I didn't really go all in on my channel until this year, I will deem Control my game of 2019. The runner-ups for ChazmaN's 2019 games would be number 2, The Outer Worlds, and number 3, Devil May Cry 5. Once again guys, as always, I just want to say thank you so much. I love you. Please stay healthy and be safe. Can't tell you how happy and awesome it is for me to be able to make these videos. I really enjoy making them, and I can't wait to deliver you guys another one. Once again, thank you so much, and I'll see you guys on the next EnteR ChazmaN. Hit it, Johnny.